Nick, we have talked time and time again about some Italian horror, and we're going to go back to that world
early
again
80s,
today.
late 70s, yeah.
Because I'm a big proponent of the Nightmare Industry documentary coming out about Italian horror. I've been trying to freshen up on that.
So remind the viewers, what's this?
So it's from the makers of In Search of Darkness and Search of Tomorrow, two documentaries we both have really, really spoken high above.
Yeah.
And this one is about Italian horror. So in doing so, I've been trying to update my Italian horror, update my video nasty list of things I've seen, and we're going to talk about one today that serves as a standalone film, but also was kind of sold as a sequel to Anthropophagus, as well as sold as Zombie 6 in some markets.
It has another title, like Monster something.
Red Blood, Monster Hunter, Horrible. It's got a lot of titles. So many titles you might say it's absurd. All right, welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for watching. Thanks for following us, and thanks for their loyal support. You can follow the show on Twitter and on Instagram. Hey, Kyle and I are both members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for other members' critiques and reviews. Today, we're going to continue our investigation into Italian horror, kind of rip-offs a little bit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They're blatant rip-offs. But this is kind of like the Italian version of Halloween. I think that's what the average, gets to catch.
Yep.
It's absurd.
Yeah, so listen to this synopsis and then listen to it again thinking of Halloween. When a mysterious, seemingly unkillable man escapes from a local medical lab on the hunt for blood, the only man who can stop him is his doctor, a priest who believes him to be the embodiment of evil.
So usually when Italian horror, you have to do body just... It's almost like Cronenberg. You have to show the visceration of body. I don't know if it's because it's their Christianity background and all that stuff, but it's just body visceration. That's how you meet George Eastman in this movie. It's just like, oh, by the way, here's...
Yeah, and it's funny
Here's
because he ends the film Anthropophagus
Yeah.
with his guts disemboweled. The actor did.
Yeah.
And that film was originally going to be, this was going to be a sequel to that film, and then they kind of took out any connection, changed all the character names, but you could almost watch the two back to back. I was not a big fan of Anthropophagus, so going into this film, I was like, God, I hope this doesn't suck. And it kind of isn't a good movie. No, not by any means.
It's very drawn out. It's not a long movie, but it's just there's a lot of scenes that just eat scenery that is just not of horror or anything going. It's just the pacing.
Yeah, so there's some real strange oddities to the idea of, I think when this movie is going, when it's working, I think it's working pretty well.
Right.
It's just a case of that unevenness that kind of pervades the whole film. Whereas most of Italian horror, usually when there's nothing happening, there's a mood and a style, and usually you get a goblin score somewhere in there. And we have a goblin-esque score that kind of helps a little bit. But yeah, it is noticeable. I didn't have to have anyone tell me this was a ripoff to Halloween to see all the Halloweenness of it.
So, I'm not. One of the things I think that subtracts from the pacing of it, that there's no tension, is you have to remind the audience that there's a mad killer about. Mm-hmm. Jaws does a very well effectiveness of just, it's not, even Jaws is not even the scene, but the music builds up the tension. He might be there.
Yeah.
Something like that. Or Halloween, the music starts up and you're like, okay, I have to, red alert. You don't have that anything kind of like in this movie, and I think that takes away, because if you have scenes of not talking about the mad killer, maybe you need some tension that's manufactured, not really red herrings or something like that, to keep the emotions going.
Yeah, and if you're looking for a more recent comparison to what this film does with its music, which was done by Carla Maria Cordio, who did Troll 2, not a great credit to have your name for, but the music is very similar to how James Wan used it in Insidious, where the music hits as the scare is hitting instead of building the tone and mood for when the scare is going to happen. Contrary to Halloween, like you pointed out, where that score is constantly there reminding you that you're watching something, and kind of being almost scarier than the presence of Michael Myers himself. This score kind of only kicks in when we're already supposed to be intrigued by what's happening. And I think it's an engaging enough score, not one that's as memorable as many other Italian horror scores, how I can still hum Tenebrae, I can still sing Suspiria, and often do. This is not one that's going to stay with me, but it's excessive,
Tenebrae, Suspiria, the music is going to keep the glue almost of the enticement. And if you don't have that, you need some kind of red herrings, you need something, maybe another competitive killer, but you don't have that in here. And Joe D'Amato, right, is the director. If you haven't looked up, he's done on other horror movies, but I think this is maybe his, I don't want to say his most laziness.
It feels lazy, doesn't it?
It just set the camera most of the time and just, all right, go. Set the camera, go. There's not really like multiple cuts of take. Unless they're doing the surgery. Then it's like shot here,
Yeah.
shot here. Get there, get there.
Got to get coverage on that blood and gore, you know?
Yeah, yeah. But even you having a sit down scene and the kid's just going to read a comic book.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be more interested. I'm gonna be more interested. Like, what's the comic book?
Yeah, tell me what that panel is right there. Well, that's true. It would be hard to say this is his lazy movie because the man made like 300 films, a number of which are
It's like
pornographic in
saying
nature.
Michael Curtiz phoned in and he made over.
It's tough to say it because the ranking would be very tough. No one's doing a Joe D'Amato film ranking. No one has the time for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could see that. I could see there's an element of like it doesn't feel like he's really
Maki,
into
yeah,
it.
dude.
You know, yeah. George Eastman though is pretty. I think George Eastman is engaging. It's funny that he was a writer, director, and star in a number of films, and that when you see him in when you see him in interviews, he seems very eloquent. He seems like he knows what he's talking about. He's engaging on it. But then you just see him in the film, and he's usually a hulking mass of murder.
He's just out of control. Yeah, it's just articulate that it's not what I think he's trying to translate. Even though it's a rip off a horror movie, it's not. He's much smarter than he projects on film, and I think he's shortcutting. He just wants to get the reaction of drilling a drill through a girl's head.
Yeah.
The nurse. There's the famous murder scene is the drill through the head. I don't know. We had like drill murderers in the early '80s, from Slumber Party Massacre to the Driller Killer to New York Ripper. We had all these drill murderers, and of course, I think that's another reason. Well, we had to have this in this movie because
that's the funny thing about it is you could see it as a Halloween ripoff, but in many ways it's also a Halloween 2 ripoff because it has the hospital setting, it has the stabbing in the eye of our killer, it has the fire motif, it has the danger of children, the woman in her bed, as opposed to just being a standard babysitter killer. We have a babysitter too, but it's like an amalgam of let's take all the things we like, kind of like how I pointed out that like Zombie is kind of riffing off the voodoo films of the past, and how Contamination riffs on Alien. That's kind of what they did. They did it well, but in here it's a little bit messier.
So why is it? I believe it's significant to watch if you like horror movies and not just a throwaway thing to be forgotten, because it's a mesh of what was popular at the time. You have to think it's a snapshot of what we were seeing in the early '80s.
Yep.
And it's kind of like what Kyle said. It is just throw everything we know about works in horror movies and just do the same and almost recycle it.
Yeah.
And see if we can pull it off.
And the funny thing was, I was thinking about Asylum, which is a studio in America that tends to do this. For Transformers, they made Transmorphers. For, whenever there's a horror film coming out, I think Avengers, they had Revengers. They made their own War of the Worlds when someone else made a War of the Worlds because that's in public domain, so they could use it. They want to get you on the title. And I appreciate the fact that at least with Italian horror, there were so many different titles that they were trying to get you on. None of them were like flat out, it's a Halloween, they called it. But I would rather watch a movie that riffs and rip-offs the film with a signature style like Italian horror has than an Asylum film.
Right, and it's almost like we'll throw noodles on the floor and see what sticks.
Yeah.
Or noodles on the wall and see
And
what
some-
sticks.
some
and
noodles-
it's literally Italian. We'll throw noodles on the wall and see what sticks. And it's just like with the script, we'll throw everything out there and see if it works.
Yeah.
One of the unique things about it, even though it's about a serial killer and George Eastman is playing this manic psycho serial killer, there's no signature about his costuming, no signature weapon.
He's kind of guy in slacks.
He's just ordinary clothes. And I think another effective thing they should have done was come up with like a signature outfit or signature weapon that you see in Galileo films and with Dario Argento. That would probably make it a little more memorable.
Yeah, because I find myself thinking more of the priest, even just for the fact that he was a priest. Like, I know it's a small distinction, but I think about him running in the woods almost more than Nikos,
That was the greatest discovery. Like, who are you? And he's like, da-da.
Because he spends the whole first part of the movie like, no, he's almost like just gotten out of the shower, covered with a towel, kind of like protective of himself.
Yeah.
I find that the priest to be a little bit more something I'm going to remember from the film. Yeah, that's true. He is kind of unknowable.
Bland.
Yeah, there's something missing to that visage, and maybe it's even something like have him get an injury at the beginning of the film that doesn't immediately, because they talk about how it's all about the head. Maybe things that happen to the head don't heal up the same way. I don't know, something like that to kind of give him, or scars that don't fully heal, like they leave some sort of tissue. Because I really like the idea of an unstoppable killer, a Terminator-esque, Michael Myers-esque, someone who's going to get slashed and torn up and keep moving. One of my favorite versions is how Chucky and the Child's Play movies would like just get more and more destroyed over the course of the films and keep coming. There's something terrifying about that.
Right, yeah, because Chucky constantly gets more disfigured.
Yeah, he spent 3 whole movies just like ripped to pieces. And
He's physically becoming what he is already internally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and really interesting that I don't know why they didn't do that. When I watched this, I was like, I see more things of Slumber Party Massacre ripping off from this than a lot of like Halloween stuff. It's almost like they lifted from this movie to make a parody of their own. There's a lot of similarities, you know, like the killer from Slumber Party Massacre. It doesn't have he has the drill.
Just a guy.
It's just a guy, and he doesn't shows his face, and he has the expression that George Eastman does. It's very interesting to see these back to back and critique them. That I think Slumber Party Massacre is actually citing this movie more than any others.
Yeah, it feels like they're both maybe pulling from the same spot, and that's why we get elements that seem to blend through. I don't recall, because this film came out in 1981 in Italy. I don't know when it hit the U.S. market, so it might have hit after Slumber Party Massacre. Yeah, I don't know for certain, especially with all the different titles it had, where it actually landed in the U.S.
So it's hard to find because a lot of times in the early 80s with foreign market movies like this, they would sneak them out with different titles to collect money. And that's another reason why they have different titles, because they're like, now out is this movie. And the same theater would have the different title, now this movie. It's a way to, it's a money grabber as well.
Well, I think it's funny that
as well as avoid film reviewers.
Yeah. So you'd get people to see the movie twice, which I know a couple people that this happened to. You can avoid having the film reviewed poorly if you just put out another film with the same title. Sometimes they thought a different title would sell a little bit better in a market. And then, I mean, the funny thing is that they never went out of their way, or usually didn't go out of their way, to rename the film in the actual film. Like this title card said absurd for us. But if you watch it on a site saying Monster Hunter or something, it never changed. You know, The Mutilator, I have the Blu-ray for The Mutilator. When you watch it, it says Fall Break when it opens. And I'm like, whoa, like, what happened? So that's a notable thing.
And I'm not complaining, because everybody has a gimmick in the movie industry. You have to have something to entice people if you want to make money. But yeah, different titles is another gimmick. The other thing is I get a laugh out of is the title cards. Everybody has a generic alias in this movie, directed by Peter Newton,
because they didn't want it's a sad state of affairs that Italian distributors were nervous that Americans wouldn't want to go see a film directed by an Italian, so they had to change it to George Eastman. I think it's Montefiore or something like that is George Eastman's real Italian
something
name.
Like that, yeah.
And you know, Joe D'Amato the same way, and sometimes they'll even use different aliases throughout the film. Like D'Amato, his name would usually change for the director, but not for the cinematography, which he would do, or this and that. And it's like, I don't understand.
It's a wonderful play that you can have investigating Italian rip-off horror movies.
Yeah.
It's another little kernel that you can find and have fun with.
Yeah. And I find it funny that I always like to look for the Americanization of Italian horror films, like how they shot some of Zombie in the U.S. to just get it U.S.ified, and how this film is a bunch of people in suits going to a Super Bowl party.
So if you haven't seen the movie yet, which you should have, but the Europeans' viewpoint of what Americans do, but it's still European. Like, let's go watch the Super Bowl, but they're like going to a dinner social club.
I was someone had to point out to me that it was the Super Bowl they were watching. Yeah, they're serving up spaghetti, and there's no ruckusness at all. That's very much like, let's see how they play. It's like a whole group of Mr. Burnses watching the Super Bowl. Yeah. You know?
So I have to say, my great uncle, he loved these kind of movies when I was in my early 80s, and I was still, under the age of 6 and 5, and he had a lot of these kind of rip-off movies because they're cheap to get. But when I watch them as a kid, you're like, there's always something a little bit off to these movies that don't sink in. Like, I understand what they're trying to do. Like, you're trying to be an American movie, but you're not really not.
Yeah. Yeah, they're totally
the cars
aligned.
are a little bit different, right? Yeah.
And I find it funny because for the most part, I know that cinema distributors would decide what would get their films, but once you're in the theater, they've got you. They don't need to convince you anymore. You've spent your $1.50, you can leave at any point, but they're still keeping that money. One thing that I think Italian films, and I'm not going to say anything about Italian people in general, but Italian child actors bother the hell out of me. Because
I don't think they get a lot of coaching. I think they just put them on set and it's like, there you go.
Yeah, and I think it's a combination of the way they're dubbed as well, though. In those kinds of films, they always get the most annoying voice child actor to come in and just scream in English for 25 minutes, and it's just it's worse than watching some of the gore scenes. This is funny though because I think the two children in the film are actually siblings. They have the same last name.
Interesting.
So they were actually related, put into this film together, which would kind of heighten, I guess, if you were trying to get children to react to terrifying moments.
And the one is hospitalized, strapped in the bed. I mean, I would have a nervous. I would go catatonic if I had to do that in a scene. And I don't know how they.
Not to mention
They
you have.
fastened her into the bed, and then she's wired to the wall.
Not to mention maybe the worst parental figures ever. She's she's doing the one thing that brings her peace. She's drawing circles on a piece of paper, and her mom comes in and goes, "You're still watching that. You're still doing that garbage, huh?" Like,
Doing the spirals. If she's the same age as me, so yeah, we all had those spiral things, and we just become obsessed with it.
yeah. The only thing really fun about that is that it's that setup to when we get to see it later on. Because I don't know if I've seen that used as a defense weapon in a horror film before. I've always thought about it when I've had that in my hand as a kid. I've been like, "Oh, this is something that's going to hurt me." It's used in that way. So
Now, I don't want to give away too much for the ending, but the ending really, I'm thinking like it's Bay of Blood kind of an ending. It's one of those kind of endings like they siphon almost from Bay of Blood. Like we have to give them a kind of a go-around ending, which is kind of fascinating. I do like the ending of this. For all the things I'm criticizing for it, the ending works for me.
yeah, this is actually a terrific short film wrapped in a feature film's body. Like it has those moments where it just kind of drags, and part of it is that it's so blatantly connected to Halloween that we know what they're gonna like when we introduce that character following them. I'm like, okay, it's a Loomis. Like we're starting to get all those pieces.
I'm
in
Dr.
place.
Loomis, and I'm investigating.
Yeah. And so that's kind of the problem with it. But when it works, it is working very well. I think the ending is actually pretty entertaining. Again, except for the kid breaking out of the home and then breaking back into the home. Why would you do it?
Right, doesn't make sense, yeah.
But having George Eastman in there, like, if there's one thing going for him not looking particularly menacing as with, like,
he
a
doesn't-
costume, it's that, he definitely emotes with his face, and that the everyman aspect of him is kind of creepy, at the very least, if not genuinely terrifying. I also like the on-the-nose jump scare that's coming when she sees the child across the room and starts running to him, and she's running so far that you're like, well, obviously someone's going to, okay, he did. He jumped out at her. But
I completely agree with Kyle. It's a short film that stretched out.
yeah. Which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. This isn't a movie that I'm going to flat out ignore for the rest of my life, nor is it a film I'm going to own on Blu-ray and rewatch all the time. But if it comes up on my, if my streaming show ends and the next thing up says Absurd is playing and I can't find the remote, I'm not going to be upset about it. I think it was fine. Generally enjoyable, better, more good than bad. But generally speaking, a messy film. From someone who doesn't like Anthropophagus, this is a huge step up for the teamwork between George Eastman and Joe D'Amato.
Was that the baby eating one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the film that-
now I remember, yeah.
That's the film that is
That's all
just so much time spent for, and that's the other Tisa Farrow film, of course.
Well, I think the perception is you have to lull them to sleep, the audience, to really give the delivery punch at the ending. And I think you're doing it too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because where Anthro kind of deals with solid mood, but just not much in terms of story, this one has solid story, but not much in terms of mood. And
There
it's
you
like
go.
we have
Right,
that
yeah.
mixture of the two going with it there. Yeah, I enjoyed the film. I liked it more than that one. But Joe D'Amato is not... He's not like always going to hit it out of the park with me, and you could tell that he just funneled so many films out.
It's hard to digest, and if you haven't seen it yet, it's hard to get through the first couple minutes because that is severe lazy filmmaking. Because you just set the camera on the ground and you're watching people running. You have to break up the cutting of that. Maybe shoot a little angles of the profile going this way. Maybe the woods is oval bearing, but they just set the camera in the path and they just run to the point where the guy's out of breath for real.
Yeah.
He probably did like take 50, and it's like you have to think of really more interesting shots and get away from that scene of the chase scene. I think you can settle down, but it's hard to start a movie that way.
Yeah, it's almost like they started it as a sequel, like it was Friday the 13th Part 4 beginning, but then it just turns into a standard one-off.
Now I understand the beginning of it, but you have to make it enticing shot camera.
Yeah, there's nothing really. Yeah, I agree with you completely. The technicality of that part kind of takes away from a lot of it. But as it stands, it's
and
it's
it's
a weird
got to
movie.
get through that phase.
Yeah. There are things that work. There are things that don't. Yeah, and just from a technical perspective, I do agree with you. The laziness is on display there. One thing I want to point out, though, as a big fan of the film Demons, and as a big fan of the film The Church,
Demons
we get the
has-
Church.
yeah.
The director of
And
The
I do
Church,
like The
Mikhail
Church.
Suave, shows up in this film.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh,
Go
no,
ahead.
sorry. The
Mikhail
director of The Church, Mikhail Suave, shows up as one of the bikers in this film.
No kidding.
And he would credit Joe D'Amato for helping him get into the business and really start making his films. I think there's a special thanks to him in The Church. And Suavi would show up as a character actor on a number of Italian horror films before making his way to directing. He was the guy wearing the mask in Demons who shows up in the film. Very iconic moment in that. But he's just kind of a general everyman biker in this film too. So
it's another evolutionary step before we go that we talk about it, is because the early '80s Italian ripoffs movies were kind of sloppily made, but by the late '80s, it really got from Demons in the Church.
Yeah.
They really figured out what they were going for in the Brit.
Well,
It got better.
It's like how many American silent films would tend to be adaptations starting off, because there was that how do we kind of make a screenplay work to it. Like there was that adaptation element of most of the early short silent films were adaptations. We had our first Frankenstein in 1910, and like they were kind of building on that until they were able to build on their own success and see what works. And so that's why later 80s Italian stuff tends to work a little bit better for me, because they're able to take piecemeal what works and kind of eliminate what didn't. And this is a very experimental kind of earlier attempt.
Right. It looks like a very high class student film.
Yeah.
And the Demons has the greatest ex machina of all time. The greatest ex machina ever put on film.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I think really, if you're a horror fan and you've neglected Italian because it just seems absurd, had to do it. You have to investigate them, because you have to realize what the adoring. It's not really a parody, but it's almost like a mesh of appreciation. Let's see how we can do it from our point of view, rather than just complete the originality. But it's almost like we love what you guys are doing. Let's see if we can do it too.
Yeah, and I think again, this is not a film I would tell you not to check out. This is one I think that is still, if you're looking to kind of pad out your Italian times, this is a good benchmark to have, because it is very well known. It is one of the few video nasties from that list of about 110 films that were prosecuted for their goriness, prosecuted for their not.
It's pretty mild nowadays.
Yeah, so it's interesting to point out. I like revisiting films from the video nasties just to see like where were things in the 80s that we considered too much. And again, this is 20 years removed from, I always go back to this, 20 years removed from Psycho's Woman Flushes a Toilet and Wears a Bra on film, and that was considered.
Now we have lacerated guts and
so
showing a kid.
How quickly we move.
Yeah. So once again, we appreciate it. Definitely see the movie before we talk about it.
Yeah, go check it out. It's streaming. I found it on Tubi, which is a free streaming service. If you're not using Tubi to check out your hidden horror gems, you're missing out, because that app is fantastic.
Yeah. Yes. I agree.
So please search that one out and then come back and hopefully watch the episode again then. But thank you guys for joining us. What did you think about Absurd, aka Anthropophagus 2, Zombie 6, Grim Reaper 2,
hey, it's
everything
the best
else?
scene. It was one of the best scenes of saying the title in the movie.
That is true, yeah.
After surgery, the doctor.
Yeah, throwing back to one of the people we like on YouTube, the Horror Geek, when he points out that, like, he said the title, everybody drink. And I think the same thing is true here. So let us know your thoughts on the film down below. Is there another Joe D'Amato film that we're missing out on? Please don't talk about the pornographic stuff, because we're not talking about that on the show. But if there's another horror film from D'Amato, let us know down in the comments if we should check out further films from that.
That's classic Italian. Either I'm going to do horror movies or the naughties.
And then he went back to the
and they'll go back to
the, when the horror dries up.
That's an Italian cliche director.
Yeah, exactly. So let us know down in the comments what you thought about this film. And while you're down there, please like and subscribe. They're two things that don't cost you a dime that help support the show, and you never miss new episodes of the show. We got episodes Monday, Thursdays, and you're watching Scary Movie Saturdays right now, so join us next time for that as well. Again, check out the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance.
Yes.
And check out the Patreon down below as well. There's a link in the description. You can join some of our patrons like Tyler Prawl, who just joined, who get to help pick us the films that we're going to be talking about in the show. It's patreon.com/KyleNickOnFilm. And once again, you can find all my film reviews over at GoatFilmReviews.com.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast, a podcast anywhere you can find on the internet. And I didn't intentionally try to match my microphone today with my shirt.
No, that would be absurd.